Hey everybody, it's Jeremy from Humble Organics. One of the most common questions we get is, how do I maximize space in a small vegetable garden? So today I want to give you a few pointers on how we do this. And these strategies work really well on a lot of different kinds of crops, but work particularly well on things like lettuce. So that's what I'm going to show you today. So the first tip is something called succession planting. So the basic idea here, so lettuce grows pretty fast. And this is what lettuce looks like when it bolts. And by bolting, that just means it sends up a flower stalk, so you can see it gets really tall, and that'll happen really quickly. And once that happens, the leaves get bitter and it's not good to eat anymore. So what you can see here is that I've cleared out all this empty space here from a crop of lettuce I had planted earlier in the summer. Now, the idea of succession planting is that you don't just plant once, but you space out plantings, say, every 3 weeks or so. So I plant new lettuce seed about every 3 weeks in the garden, so that as the old seed goes bad, that frees up space to lay down new seed. So if you look back here, what you can see is the crop that I had planted right after the one that I just took out, and so you can see it's starting to get pretty big. So the second tip that I want to share with you is to maximize yield through plant spacing. Okay, so if you read the back of a seed packet, often they're going to give recommendations for spacing, and those recommendations are not really for intensive gardening in a raised garden bed. They're for somebody, working on a farm where you have rows between, where you have to walk or you have to till or something like that. So we don't pay a whole lot of attention to the spacing on the back of a seed packet. You do want to keep the final spacing in mind. So for example, with lettuce, final spacing for lettuce probably want to be around 6 inches. But the key is that's for mature lettuce plants. Okay, so by the time the lettuce matures, you want plants to be roughly 6 inches apart so that you can, so that they'll be growing comfortably. What you can see is when we sow seeds, we sow them really densely. All right, so this area here is planted much more densely than we want to be for final spacing. But the bonus about that is that what we can do is when we thin these plants, okay, so I'm just going to start thinning these to make more room between each plant. So I'm just going to pull a whole plant, and then we got some nice baby greens. Okay, so these are like the baby greens you pay a lot for at the farmer's market. We can go through, thin this whole area out, and harvest along the way. Okay, and so you may not even need to get to the final spacing. Okay, you can do a second thin in a week or so if you want. Okay, so you can see I thinned this little patch out here, and we're still not to the final spacing, so these plants are still closer together than 6 inches. But what I'll continue to do over the next week or two is just come out and keep thinning. And every time I do that, we'll get closer to that 6-inch final spacing, but we'll also get a salad as well. So you can see we just got a whole bunch of greens that'll keep us busy for the next week just from thinning out those plants. So this is a really good way to get a lot of lettuce from a small area. And by the way, you'll notice some beets mixed in here as well. This also works really well with beets. So people sometimes don't realize you can actually eat beet greens, so the tops, these leaves, especially when they're small, make a really great addition to salads. So if you plant those beets really closely together, you can go in and thin them out and take the leaves and use them in your salads as well. All right, so the last thing I want to show you is just how I seed this open area here with this dense planting. So I'm not very careful about this. I'm just going to dump some lettuce seed in my hand and then literally just sprinkle it all over this area. And you can see I'm doing it really densely. So that's going to give us, these are going to sprout in the next week, and then within, say, 2 weeks after that, we're going to be starting to harvest baby greens. I just sprinkle a little bit of soil over the top. Lettuce seed, actually you don't really want to bury, so you can just kind of rake a little soil over it or just throw some over it, and that'll be good. But you don't want to bury them too deep. Okay, so quick recap, 2 tips for maximizing space in your garden. The first one is succession planting. So as we just showed you with lettuce, we'll plant lettuce seeds every 3 to 4 weeks throughout the growing season to make sure that we have a continuous supply. One crop out, we put another crop down. You can do this, another way you could do this is getting in an early spring crop. So for example, like peas. Peas you can plant really early in the spring. You can harvest them here. We harvest them sometime in June. We clear them out, and that leaves us enough time to put another crop of something like beets or kohlrabi that we can squeeze in before the end of the season. So succession planting is tip number 1 for maximizing garden space. Tip number 2 is to plant densely, particularly when you're talking about crops where you can actually eat any plants that you thin. So we showed you that with lettuce, we showed you that with beets. You can plant densely, and then you can gradually pull those plants over the course of a couple weeks to reach that final spacing. And as you pull those plants, you can use them in salads. So those 2 tips, if you follow those strategies, those are going to help you maximize the amount of food that you can get out of a really actually pretty small garden space. So enjoy your gardening.